Welcome to the first episode of Learning with Lafferty. So today we're going to be talking about our first beginning chapter, which is an introduction to anatomy and physiology and the organization of the body. So as you can kind of see behind me and in my shirt and around me, I absolutely love manatees. So my manatee, I'm going to introduce him, Manee the Manatee, is going to help me in some of this. So definitely important when you're learning anatomy and physiology, it's very important that you try to find ways to relate the information to your everyday life. Very also important is that you make sure that your textbook that you have, that you're constantly reading it over and over again, and then of course using this video to help you in your learning. Drawing, obviously watching videos such as this, talking about it on a daily basis is a great way to make sure that you're incorporating that information that you are learning visually out of a textbook and connecting it with something that you can relate to in your daily life. So it's a learning process that you first need to figure out of how do you learn best. Obviously within this video I'll be, talking about things throughout the video series. You'll definitely will see, like, I'll add some pictures and videos also there for you to kind of relate back to. But definitely need to make sure of you first need to sometime this week figure out what's your way that you learn the best within your learning style. So the first thing that I want to talk about within the textbook that I'm using for this particular class, and again, if you're using a different textbook, always make sure that you are using the learning objectives or the outlines that come at the beginning of the chapters. So the first thing that I want to talk about in this chapter of the introduction to the human body is a couple terms. The first term is anatomy, and the second term will be physiology. So anatomy relates to the study of the structure. So such as the manatee, the parts. Okay, and like I said, I'm going to relate some of this to a manatee because I love manatees, but definitely think about the human body because that is what you are tested on. The human anatomy, okay, not the mammal anatomy, unless you were taking marine biology, but this obviously is not a marine biology course. But definitely think about the fin, okay, that would be the part, okay. So when you see the word structure, think about the parts, such as like the eyes and the fins, okay, the flippers. What would those parts do within the human body? So like instance, the heart, okay, what the heart is, okay, not what the heart does, the structure are the parts, okay. Now we know with anatomy and physiology, those two things correlate. If the structure, the anatomy is damaged, then it's definitely going to eventually affect the physiology, the P part. So the A in A and P is anatomy, which is the structure. Okay, that's very important. You've got to know what that word means. Definitions are key. Especially as you're reading through your textbook, you're going to see in any textbooks that you use, if a word is bold, maybe it's a blue color. I know some textbooks like to use blue or different colors, or italicized, like that kind of fancy writing. That is very important. The publishers put that there for a reason. That's going to tell you that there's something important you need to know about that particular word, and definition is going to be key. Okay, so if you don't understand the word, then when you see it in a test, you're not going to know what the correct answer is. So anatomy is the study of the structure. Okay, so think about your manatee. If it helps you, think of the parts. Okay, but the human body is what we're relating it to. Now the P, the physiology, is the study of the function. Okay, so the P part is the function. So think about, to kind of help you, I like to put letters and stuff together. Think of P.F. Chang's, okay, if you've ever eaten at that restaurant. So you think of P, F, okay, so physiology and function. Okay, those two go together, meaning I'm studying the function of the parts. So bring Manee back in here. So his flipper, okay, his tail flipper, think about what the job of it would be to, of course, swim him around to get him from point A to point B. His mouth, okay, think about the parts. The parts would be the anatomy, okay. The anatomy of the mouth, of course, obviously within us, our teeth help to chew the food. Of course, they're more gummy than the food. But when you think about that, the physiology is what the purpose of that part does. And again, if the structure is damaged, eventually it will affect the physiology. You got to know those definitions. Now, how we know something is wrong in the body is when the physiology and the anatomy aren't working. Okay, that's when we see the abnormal, okay, functioning of those parts. It could be one, or it could be both. Okay, depending upon, sometimes one could go bad and not totally. It takes a while for the other one to stop stop working. So that's called a disease. Okay, now a disease, how we know a disease is when we study it, and that study is called pathology. So pathology is the study of disease. So that's another word at the beginning of the book that you definitely want to understand. What is the study of a disease? And a disease is when the anatomy, the structure, and or the physiology, the functioning is not working. Okay, now we're going to get into anatomy, physiology. We're going to spend more testing on physiology because that's the harder, honestly, of the two. Anatomy is kind of more based of memorization. Okay, flashcards will be really good, drawings will be really good for that. But physiology is truly understanding that function critically, okay, or clinically sometimes it's called. Okay, I got to critically think to figure out, okay, yes, I know the parts, but I need to know, okay, why are the parts not working the way that they need to within the body? So that's a pathology that we'll get into later classes. Now, the next part, after you get through some of these like key words that you need to know, and again, if there's key words, definitely at the beginning of the chapters, ends of the chapters, if you don't know the word, you need to look it up. Okay, that's important. You know, your book has it. Some books have, the page numbers of where those key words are, but every book is always going to have key terms. You got to know. If I don't know what the word means, that's going to hurt me on a test. That's important. Now, the next part is what they call the levels of organization. So when we put a whole bunch of things together, okay, so coming back, and I'll relate it back to the human body, of this stuffed animal. Okay, I know that's sad. Yes, you're a stuffed animal. But the stuffed animal, we think about all the parts that make it up. Okay, think of microscopic. Okay, so you think of fabrics, and I know he's like terrified that I would open him up and show you his stuffing inside. Okay, we think of the smallest to the biggest that makes the whole part. Now in the human body, that is chemicals. Chemicals are the simplest. So we get a whole bunch of chemicals, which is crazy when you look at our body, that makes up the body. So chemicals, take a whole bunch of chemicals and you put them together. Those chemicals then become cells. Now we'll talk about cells in our next series, okay, our next video that we'll get into in a couple weeks when we talk about how a cell differs. Okay, so just think of it just a general cell. We'll get into the different type of cells into a future video. So chemicals group comes together to make what? A cell. Okay, well, like I said, we'll get into the different cells later. A group of cells then, heading forward, connect up together to make a group of tissues. Okay, so that's very important. You definitely need to get that key part. So when we talk about tissues in a future video, it's not going to make sense. Okay, like, oh, that's just a group of cells that work together for a purpose, that work together with a whole bunch of chemicals that came together. So you can see like the imbalances in the body that we'll talk about, of how that a one imbalance here makes a huge difference in the whole matrix. Okay, now the word matrix, I'll go ahead and kind of tell you now as you're reading not only this video but into future videos that you're going to see in those chapters. A matrix is what the liquid that the cells live around. So think about making a cake. Okay, so if you want to make a fudgy brownie, okay, versus a cakey brownie, you're going to add more or less eggs. Okay, so think of matrix, not the movie, okay, but we think of matrix definitely being the consistency around the cells, okay, how much liquid and what the chemicals are. So chemicals, cells, tissues. Now kind of go past that. The next part of a group of tissue makes what? It's going to make an organ. Okay, so when we think about organs, we definitely are thinking about, like the heart and the lungs. So definitely know the different type of organs within the body. Now those organs work together as a system. Okay, that's called the organ systems. And the last, most complex is going to be the organism itself. So the whole piece. Okay, the whole human body. So you've got to know the levels from the simplest chemicals to the most complex, which is going to be the organism itself. That's very, very important when you're thinking about this chapter. Now, the next part kind of relates to that. Go ahead and start looking and understand those organ systems, what they are. Okay, now depending upon, again, in your all's textbook that I'm, with this particular video that I'm working with you all, is, you think about Lovin's systems. Sometimes I've seen 12, depending on the anatomy and physiology books. So anything from the organ systems and the integumentary system, know what entails in that system, so when you get to those later chapters and those videos, that you're going to understand a little bit before you even talk about it. So when I say the integumentary system, you know that, oh, that's the skin and that's the glands. Okay, that's the body, cooling and heating up itself. Okay, it's definitely important. So things like lymphatic and respiratory and digestion. Okay, so definitely know the parts, the individual organs within that system will be key into future classes. And also kind of with that, one thing I'll mention is that, this beginning, A&P, the intro, might be stuff you obviously have heard in a biology class, maybe even a basic A&P class you would have had in high school. Maybe for some of you it's fresh, like just last year, or maybe some of you it's been like 30 years. Okay, it's been a while since you've been to high school. So this is the basic, but it is the most important because it's the foundation. So think about building a Lego house. I want to keep the base safe, okay, and strong, so as I build my house on top of it, that my house is going to stay. So that's why, some of these things, if you don't know it, you need to make sure you're strong on it before you move on to chapters, 2, 3, and get, obviously eventually when we get into an anatomy and physiology too. So again, know those general functions of each of those systems also too, like what the respiratory system would do, and so as you're going through it. Now, some more key words here. Another one that you're going to see is homeostasis. Okay, so definitely, kind of going in line with your textbooks. And again, it can vary from textbook, but for you all, I'm keeping it in order for your particular chapter. So think about homeostasis. So I need to know what the word means. If you take the word homeo, okay, that means the same. If you take the word stasis, that also means the same. So I know it's redundant. The same. So homeostasis, you need to know the meaning. Okay, so I want to kind of read it directly what most textbooks say. The balance of the body, trying to maintain, making sure it's consistent on the inside versus what's happening on the outside. Okay, it's continuous. Now the body has what they call set points. Okay, so set points could be like a temperature. Think of a thermostat within your house. So maybe you set it at 68 to 72, and it wants to stay within that range. Okay, now if it goes below that range, then heater obviously would kick on. If you go above that range, your air conditioner would kick on. So that's 68 to 72. When you think of the human body, of course, that 98.6. So maybe your range for the human body, as far as temperature, might be a 97 to 99. Okay, and the body tries to constantly, and it does a good job of it, keeping it there. But that's beyond just temperature. So when we get to pH and chemicals that we'll start talking about in the next video, that's where you think about your pHs. They've got to be within that certain range. So hyper versus hypo. Okay, so hyper, we think of excessive. Okay, so excessive amounts of salt, versus hypo, lower amount deficiencies. Okay, but the body keeps a set point as much as possible. Now, how is that controlled? By what they call a feedback loop. So definitely kind of think back to your furnace of, again, that thermostat will change things. So there's sensors. Now, obviously, that has its own, that's electrical. I'm not getting into electrical. We're going to talk about the human body, but within our body, that electrical part are these things called receptors. So receptors are just special cells throughout our whole body. So in our skin, when you feel something touching it, it might be soft and you're petting your cat, or for my instance, petting Manee, okay, and you think, oh, that's so soft, or it's really hard. Those are receptor cells that sense that information. They send the feedback to the monster motherboard, okay, our brain. Okay, your brain is that control center, so everything has to go to the brain. Okay, of course, we'll talk about later in future videos of kind of like, okay, what about the spinal cord? Well, the spinal cord is really kind of the tail that comes off of the brain. Okay, so kind of getting ahead of myself there. Now, so sensors, receptors receive that information, send it to the motherboard, the control, and then there's effectors in our body that make a difference, that make a change. Now, those are all the organs. Okay, so think about I'm too hot. So then my body senses that, okay, sends it to my brain. My brain might cause me to sweat, okay. So the organs within the integumentary system, okay, like your glands, sweat glands would be activated and cause an effect to happen to change me back to homeostasis. So think of balancing, okay, is very, very important. Now the body is made up of lots of tissue, okay. In future videos we'll get into those tissues. They're better known as barriers, okay. Now we think of like this huge barrier on the outside of us, our skin. I'm kind of focusing on the integumentary system a lot, I know. But we also have fluids, okay. We have fluids that help to separate areas, okay. So think about living on an island, okay. So you're on your island, you're enjoying yourself, and then obviously if there was a tsunami came, that could change the environment within the island, okay. So there's membranes, which are tissue, and fluids that keep the body to help to maintain that homeostasis. So there'll be like doors that we'll look at with the cells that literally allow things to come and go. Okay, so we'll look at some things called cytoses. Again, that'd be a word that you definitely want to be familiar with. Now, when you're thinking about these barriers, either be a tissue or fluid, we got to think of this thing called gradients. Okay, and what prevents that gradients is any resistance to that. So a gradient is going to be a difference between certain values. Okay, it could be a physical value, like a lot of tissue blocking, a lot of doorways that I have to go through, or it could be a chemical value. Okay, like high and low. Okay, but it's just the difference between the two. Okay, so gradient, that word you definitely want to start getting familiar with. We'll talk a lot about gradients when we talk about the cells. Okay, from a high number to a low number, that is a normal. Okay, they call it a downward passive movement of something on the outside of a cell, such as maybe sodium that's really high, needs to get into where the low number is to make a change. Okay, because remember, homeostasis is about keeping things the same, but as we eat, we're changing things, aren't we? Okay, as we stand in the sun, or we're out in the freezing cold, we're making a change. That's important. Now, resistance is any type of like resist, hence the word. I think of like the Lego movie, the resistance. Okay, so resistance is anything that changes that flow. Okay, it could be a downward or even an upward, but usually it's kind of like most of it is from a high to low, but yes, we can have resistance that comes from a flow upwards, but not as common. Okay, that would be more kind of a blockage within the body. Now the next part that I want to relate to is directional terms. Okay, so we talked about a little bit about, some definitions and words. Now again, key medical. Okay, now I'm going to use Manee, okay, to kind of help you here, but I really challenge you obviously to, maybe take a picture of somebody, or you can be in a pet, but make sure you get that pet in anatomical position. Okay, now Manee is not like a shark that has a fin on the back of him. Okay, so his dorsal fin, if he had one, would be here, but we got to get him where his dorsal fin's in the back. Okay, so directional terms, or they call them body relative positions, is very important. So before you even kind of say what's left, right, north, west, okay, you have to, with the body, get them in the universal position. Now the universal position is called the anatomical position. Okay, so he's an anatomical. Okay, if it was me, then I'd have my palms facing forward. Okay, I would be facing you, which I am now. I'd be standing up. Okay, which I'm not going to, and my feet are facing forward. Okay, so it's a relative relationship position. The body is standing, the arms are at the side, my palms need to be facing out, okay? The head and the feet need to be facing forward, not at the side, facing forward. And then you're going to assume that everything that we're talking about is in relationship to that. So the terms we're going to talk about are always opposite of each other, okay? So the first one I'll start with is the interior, okay, and the posterior, okay? So interior is the front of your body. Okay, it literally means ventral. Okay, so ventral, that word, if you don't know Latin, I'm going to be teaching you some Latin along the way. Ventral means belly. Okay, so when you touch your belly this week, rub your belly. Okay, think about, okay, I'm touching the interior part of my body, the ventral part of my body. Okay, it's the front of your body. The back of your body, and I'll kind of turn him around. Okay, obviously he doesn't need to turn around, but the back of him, okay, the back of me, okay, would be the posterior portion. That's very important. So belly, ventral, dorsal. So the thing about the dorsal fin is the dorsal fin, and like a shark, okay, okay, which I think he'd be terrified of, but he's not. They're actually, that's what I love them. They call him the mighty manatee, the gentle creature of the sea, okay, because they get along with everybody. But a shark, we think about the dorsal fins in the back. Okay, that's important. There'll be keywords that you want to. Now, relationship-wise, so think about, okay, my belly is what to my back? Okay, my belly is interior to my back as far as the relationship of it. Now, another one would be superior and inferior. Okay, so my head is superior, my toes, okay, in his case his flippers, his tail flippers or fin, are going to be inferior. So superior means above, inferior means below. So my manee's fin is what in relationship to his head? Okay, it's inferior, it's below. Okay, so again, talk about touch your parts, touch a stuffed animal, a dog, whatever, and talk in one part in relationship to the other part. Okay, it's going to help you. Now the next one is medial lateral. Okay, so think about if you have, and he actually does have it. I'll turn around so you can kind of see it. He has this line in the middle. We don't have a line that goes down through us, but that's the medial middle line. Okay, so it's in the middle, M for M. Okay, M&Ms are delicious, by the way. So that's the medial portion. Anything that goes away from it, okay, so I'll turn it back around so he'll be in anatomical. Anything going left or right from that, away from that middle, is considered to be lateral. Okay, so lateral literally means towards the side of the body. Okay, this would be the side, or further from the middle. Okay, so arms would be a good example that kind of help you, like my thumb. A thumb is laterally based on my body, where my pinky is medially based. It's closer to the midline. Okay, that would be, again, working with those words are important. Proximal and distal is another one. Okay, now proximal and distal relates to two ways. It always relates to your arms and your legs. That is very important. And it also can relate to the beginning and the end of an organ, such as like your small intestine, just for an example, like the beginning of my small intestine, the proximal part attaches to my stomach. Okay, when we get to those parts. The distal part attaches to my large intestine. Okay, so that's just one example within your body. But if you look at the word of proximal and distal, a lot of students get those confused. Proximal means nearest to the origin. Okay, so like here would be the attachment point for this fin. That would be proximal. The very end of it, like where the fingernails are at, would be distal. Okay, so think about yourself. So my shoulder is what in relationship to my fingers? Okay, my shoulder is proximal. These would be distal. So the most distal part of your body are your fingernails and your toenails. Okay, so that will be definitely helping you. And then think about organs when we get to those organs into future classes. Now, besides the like north, east, west, south, that type of stuff, definitely be thinking about also how the body is divided into what they call planes. Not planes of like, the movie, they're the plane, okay? Not like that back in the day. Hawaii Five-0, those type of things that I may be familiar with. Some of you may know what some of those shows are. But the planes of division are sagittal, frontal, and transverse. Now you can kind of throw what they call a mid-sagittal, and a mid-sagittal would be just kind of the middle, okay? So sagittal plane is a side to side. So if I was to watch the Saw movies, don't watch horror movies, but if you have, and they cut somebody right down, right between the forehead and went all the way back with that razor, and then I was left with two sides, that would be considered to be a sagittal plane. Okay, you got to know again, what is it dividing and what is left? Okay, so I will be left with, of course, a left and a right side. Now, transverse is a top and a bottom. So think of S for S, side to side, and T for top and bottom. So when I cut something in half like this, and I'm left with the top, I'm left with the bottom. Now, so we think about the last one as being frontal. So think about the front and the back. Okay, so again, sagittal was the one where we cut down like through the forehead back. Okay, left the side and the side. T transverse is when we cut anywhere. Like I can even cut off the head as we left with the head and a torso. Okay, the top and a bottom. Okay, in superior, inferior, and transverse is related to that type of cut. Okay, the last one is frontal, where I'm left, I cut them this way, okay, with a slice, that's left with a front and a back, and an interior portion and a posterior portion. portion. So definitely make sure that you know the 3 planes. Okay, sagittal, transverse, and frontal. Those will be important. There are some other what they call planes of cut, such as like cross sections, like when you just cut off little tiny pieces, longitudinal, okay, which would be up and down, like an oblique would be kind of a side to side type of cut. But definitely know the 3 main ones, okay, as far as divisions of planes. Now, the last parts we'll get into is relating to the body and the body parts. Okay, so medically body parts is going to be definitely important with it. Now, the medical body parts are, and again, it kind of varies from book to book, even though you see a lot of similarities. But in Ural's book, it definitely makes sure that you know all of those names associated with that picture. Okay, the naked man. Okay, most books for some reason is a naked man. Okay, occasionally you have a naked woman there to label the parts, such as I need to know my cranium or cranial is referring to things in my skull. Okay, so back to that anatomy part. Okay, but then the physiology part would be cranial problems, cranium. Okay, you'll see sometimes the UM used. Facial, okay, which would mean face. Thorax, which would mean chest. Some really important ones would be like your armpits. Okay, our armpits are called axillary. Okay, so some words that you may not be familiar with. So there's a pretty good list there, like popliteal. Okay, the popliteal space is behind your knee. So know the medical terms, because you're not always just going to have them say, okay, we're going to talk about the back of the knee. You might say we're going to talk about the popliteal region. So definitely very important. You got to know those regions, and also know those in relationship to superior, inferior. Okay, so I might say, okay, the parietal, okay, area, which means crown. Think about where you'd place a crown. You can see why you need to know those words. Is what in relationship to the plantar region? Okay, the plantar region is the sole of my foot. Well, parietal, the crown's up here. Okay, so that would be superior versus my soles of my foot would be the inferior portion. Okay, so put those together. You got to know the medical words. Now, within those medical words, you need to know like where are the organs kept. Okay, the majority of them. Okay, is very important, especially the vital ones. Okay, now dorsal versus ventral. Okay, the 2 different cavities that hold certain organs in our body. They're very important. So when you're looking at anatomical position, remember ventral. If you knew that meant belly, hopefully you're touching your belly this week. Ventral is the belly. Okay, so think about everything that's in my belly. Okay, so it is subdivided ventral into thoracic. Okay, thoracic would be my lung region, so think about my lungs and my heart. And then the abdominal cavity is the bigger of the group. The abdominal cavity, of course, holds all the organs that we relate to. Of course, you think about urinary system. We think about, of course, digestion, reproduction. Okay, those would be within the abdominal cavity. Now, I'll go ahead and talk about dorsal, then I'll come back to the abdominal cavity. Dorsal, remember dorsal fin? Okay, it's in the posterior portion of your body. Dorsal is the easiest because it only has really 2 organs, okay, that really are kind of one, is your brain and your spinal cord. Okay, so within that cavity, okay, and again, a cavity is going to have tissue that helps to protect it, holds your brain and your spinal cord. Okay, that's important. So the 2 cavities, ventral and dorsal. Okay, dorsal is in the back. It has your cranial cavity, which holds your brain, and it also has your spinal cavity that holds your spinal cord. You definitely need to know that. Ventral, thoracic is more superior. Okay, so it holds our lungs and our heart. Okay, it also has a region in there called the mediastinum. Okay, we'll look at those words that are in the book. It's important for you to know them now, because when we talk about the mediastinum region, it's the area that's right between your lungs. Okay, so like in him, it would be right through here. And then at the bottom, inferior portion of that ventral cavity is the abdominal pelvic cavity. So it's in 4 different quadrants, 9. Gotta do it here. 9. Like I can't add today. 9 different regions that you need to be familiar with those names. Okay, so the 4 quadrants are right and left. Okay, and that's important to kind of think about. This is my left side. So when you draw your person, you remember your right is your left and your left is your right when you're looking in anatomical position. So we think about our left side, we have an upper and a lower. On my right side, I have an upper and a lower quadrant. But those are even more divided when we get into all these organs of where the organs are located. Okay, like I need to know the difference between my liver, where it's located, versus my appendix. Okay, or where my iliac region is going to be an inferior region. Okay, so I say play tic-tac-toe with it. I'm not expecting you within this video to know the individual organs, but obviously when we get into future, we talk about the liver, we talk about a bone called the ilium, which is the iliac region. We definitely need to be familiar with those words and where they're at within that abdominal pelvic cavity itself. Now in your book, again, if you don't know the word, you need to look up the word. Okay, that's important. There's always, in every textbook you're going to have, there's always a summary at the end that kind of summarizes, so definitely using that. It could be just words. In the one book that I'm using for this, you're going to have like the different like concept map of like, you know, has one thing and then has boxes below it. Definitely use that. It's always going to have vocabulary, okay, better known as medical terminology. Okay, they're going to throw some diseases, better known as pathologies, also within that group. Well, hopefully you've had fun in the first installment of Learning with Lafferty, Anatomy and Physiology. And don't forget, of course, Manee is helping to participate throughout this journey with you. So you all have a good day, and I will see you all soon.